Hi, my name is Shannon. I wanted to make a series of informal, entry-level videos about film and filmmaking. They're not all intended to be comprehensive or in-depth. Instead, they should serve as a set of starting points for people who are curious about movies but might want a little direction. For this first video, there are two main points that I want to cover. Nothing very in-depth or technical, just two kind of abstract things that have informed how I look at film that I would like to share. Number one is that you need to understand that you need to look into the history and the culture of film if you really want to appreciate it. This doesn't mean that people who know more about movies are better than you, or that you don't care about movies if you don't study them. It isn't a contest, and your enjoyment isn't automatically less sincere than that of someone with encyclopedic film knowledge. I just mean that film history is fascinating. No movie exists in a vacuum, and looking at their context will increase your enjoyment of films dramatically. It can also inspire you if you're an aspiring filmmaker. My favorite example to bring up when I talk about this is Francois Truffaut. Truffaut was a young critic who wrote for a magazine called Cahiers du Cinéma. Francois, gravedigger of French cinema, Truffaut's reviews were scathing. He didn't pull any punches when writing about movies, and at times he would attack the entire French filmmaking tradition itself. Because of what he'd written, he was the only French critic not invited to the Cannes Film Festival in 1958. Then, in 1959, he made The 400 Blows.
Toute la presse en émoi. Ce gosse vient de faire éclater une bombe.
A seminal piece of the French New Wave canon, a film widely regarded to be one of the best movies ever made, particularly one of the best about adolescence, and a personal favorite of mine. 400 Blows and Truffaut went on to win the Best Director prize at Cannes in 1959.
9, en soirée, au Festival de Cannes, a lieu la projection officielle des 400 coups. C'est un triomphe.
See, Truffaut's vitriol was not the easy smug nitpicking commonly seen in online film criticism now. It was an expression of his adoration of cinema and his sincere wish that it would improve, that the medium he loved could be taken to its full potential, and that bloated, big-budget trash could be replaced with something more worthy.
J'ai toujours pensé que le cinéma était très bien, simplement que ça manquait de sincérité et qu'il fallait faire la même chose en mieux. Très près du documentaire, avoir le moins possible de travailler, fonctionner avec le minimum de fiction.
French New Wave directors opted to tell new kinds of stories using new methods. They both played with the form of film and shot quickly and cheaply, making creative use of resources. Truffaut and his French New Wave and Left Bank contemporaries helped revolutionize cinema, and all of that originated in film clubs and in a magazine started by his close friend and mentor, André Bazin. Cinema is full of stories like this. If I didn't look back on film history, I'd be missing that particular inspiration. If you look into film history, film technique, the culture of film, film academia, film critics online, if you make friends who also like film and who can introduce you to stuff you never would have heard of otherwise, if you take the time to do these things, then you'll have a much richer understanding of and appreciation for movies. The more you learn and let yourself get engaged with cinema, the bigger its world looks to you, and the more fun you can have. Any good filmmaker loves film too, and they often betray that love in a way you can only really catch if you're also fluent. Even if you don't know who Truffaut and his contemporary Jean-Luc Godard are, you've probably heard of Quentin Tarantino, the American filmmaker who took French New Wave formal techniques and incorporated them into his films. Tarantino loved Godard, though he sort of outgrew that love eventually.
Godard was so influential to me at the beginning of my aesthetic as a director, of like wanting to be a director. His kind of like lack of complete any type of film style, just wanting to make movies for love of it. Godard is the one who taught me the fun and the freedom and the joy of breaking rules. You know, setting up a close-up on the back of somebody's head as opposed to, you know, and just around with the entire medium, all right, and breaking rules.
The second point that I want to make in this video is that you need to understand that figuring out why people value certain films more than others doesn't mean that you have to value those same films. You don't have to like every good film, and you don't have to hate every bad film. If you watch 400 Blows and hate it, that's okay. I might wonder what's wrong with you, because for real, it's really good. But it doesn't make me better than you. Lots of people who know way more than you or me about movies love it too, though, and it's worth finding out why, even if your own subjective enjoyment differs from theirs. For example, I think Jean-Luc Godard is a hack. I've seen 3 of his films and didn't particularly enjoy any of them. I feel like he's trying too hard to be cool, and I find some of his content kind of offensive in a way I'd never felt watching a Truffaut or Varda film.
But I consider Godard to be to cinema what Bob Dylan was to music. I haven't grown out of Dylan, I've grown out of Godard, all right? And I'm not kicking the old guy, all right? It's just I've grown out of him.
Le film c'est la vie et la caméra c'est l'art, ou alors ou le contraire.
J'ai vu Jouer à bout de souffle et Je trouve qu'on s'efforce beaucoup de salir les choses et les gens.
He is a huge and hugely influential figure in cinema, though, and his path is just as fascinating to trace his true foes. I can appreciate him as a filmmaker and understand what he did was revolutionary during his time. I don't have to enjoy his movies to do that. And, hey, if I revisited his films in a few years down the line, I might come around. Who knows? Bottom line, I really hate it when people are elitist and turn other people off from getting into a medium because they teach them to be afraid of being judged.
Want a donut? No. I don't eat donuts or hamburgers or any other food that has approval of the masses. Did you, see Sanford and Son last night? I don't watch television. I don't even own a television. Notice I didn't say TV. TV is a nickname, and nicknames are for friends, and television is no friend of mine.
This is a huge soapbox topic of mine, but I don't believe in the concept of a guilty pleasure. You like what you like. If you feel like what you enjoy isn't good, or at least that other people might not think it's good, then watch more. Branch out. There's this natural progression where the more you know about film, the more confident you get in your likes and dislikes, and the less you care about your standing with the kind of people who would look down on you for not being a snob. For me, talking about movies is more about the exchange of ideas and perspectives than some dumb taste contest. When I run into people who do try to make it a contest,
You want to go see a movie then? Maybe go see that one about the Coupod? I only go and see foreign films.
I usually avoid them. Hi, it's Shannon again. In my experience, the most direct way to get further into movies is to watch more movies. This time, I want to talk about how to approach movies themselves and figure out what you want to watch, being that there's so much to choose from and it can get a little overwhelming. This video especially is geared more towards people just starting out and might not have as much utility for someone who's been into film for a while. When looking at different movies and trying to pick one out, be sure to ease yourself in. Do a little bit of research. Films, even films from the same director, can vary wildly in how accessible they are. You don't necessarily become a more intelligent person as you watch more films, but you do grow in your understanding of their language. I'm glad that I either waited to see or just didn't happen to see certain movies until I had a deeper understanding of film and more films under my belt, because it would have been a shame to have a bad or incomplete experience with a great movie. For instance, one of my favorite directors and someone I've liked for a very long time is David Lynch.
It's such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your telephone.
I started watching his and Mark Frost TV show Twin Peaks in late high school. The first time I watched the first season I wasn't really feeling it, but when I rewatched it I was struck by a certain kind of weirdness and beauty that captivated me.
Fellas, don't drink that coffee.
You'd never guess. There was a fish in the percolator. Sorry.
It took me more than one viewing to get acclimated to his world. Even with all of its horror and idiosyncrasy, Twin Peaks is definitely one of Lynch's more accessible works. I'm glad that I saw Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks before something like Mulholland Drive. His stranger and more experimental works aren't necessarily better, but they're probably not the best place to start. I have no idea how I would have handled Mulholland Drive in high school, and not because I was young, but because at that point I just started getting into film and didn't really know anything about it or how to process it.
You talk about making connections. It seems to me that that's what that recurrent visual motif is about, and I know you hate saying what things mean in your films, but am I right in thinking that that's at least in the right area?
No.
There are also directors who I really love, like Shane Carruth, who I'd have trouble recommending to anyone who doesn't care about working to keep up with a film. Mulholland Drive and Upstream Color are both wonderful films that do not condescend to or look down on the viewer, but simultaneously refuse to spoon-feed you. Not everyone is in the mood to struggle through Carruth's film Primer, but Primer is a very rewarding film for the kind of person who takes the time to appreciate it. Dan Harmon, Community showrunner and creator, talked about struggling with this in an AV Club interview. The idea of media as something comforting and familiar versus something challenging. As a film enthusiast, I'm pretty much always looking for that engagement and that challenge. That's not where everyone who watches movies is, but it's somewhere you'll have to be able to reach if you want to appreciate film as much as you can. You should challenge yourself, and I don't want to discourage anyone from certain movies right off the bat. It isn't that you should only watch this or that movie if you're some kind of film expert, because it would be beyond your tiny brain otherwise. It's more just something to consider at the beginning or if you ever get frustrated. You just have to keep an open mind and give yourself time. Something like the film Amélie...
Amélie?
What was that?
It's a reference to the Amélie from the
movie Amélie?
Amélie?
Because she just walks
not
around
an impression. You just...
It's about a young girl
I am Amelie.
who can only say her own name.
I cook an egg with a spoon.
Is kind of the cliched baby's first foreign film. It's very sweet and charming and easy to digest, and I don't mean any of that as an insult.
Fall in love again with me, Amelie. Now on DVD.
It's still a fun movie, and all that makes it a good place to start. In my first film class, I watched Run Lola Run, Chungking Express, and The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and I really loved all of them. They're also films I recommend to someone just starting out. If you don't have access to or interest in a film class, just try googling film class syllabus or film studies syllabus or intro to cinema syllabus. If you find what looks like a good one, try challenging yourself to watch one of the films on that syllabus a week until you've seen all of them. Join a film club. If you don't know of any, start your own. There were no film clubs at my high school, so I had friends over to watch movies or watch them with my relatives. My first college had no film classes, so I got involved with theater and went to almost every meeting of the unofficial film club there. That was where I first saw films like Clerks, M, City of God, Clockwork Orange, Ikiru, The Third Man, and, of course, Amélie, and where I brought personal inspirations and favorites like Hot Fuzz and In Bruges to share.
What about Lethal Weapon? No. You seen Die Hard, dude? No. Bad Boys 2? No. You ain't seen Bad Boys 2?
Just generally, many of my most rewarding experiences with films were shaped by the people I shared those films with.
Point Break or Bad Boys 2?
Which one do you think I prefer?
No, I mean, which one do you want to watch first?
And especially when looking for current films to watch, you should find critics to follow, but don't ever feel like you always have to agree with them or that they should always agree with you. A critic is a lens that you look at films through, not a perfect clone of you and your tastes and preferences. Also, avoid people who just recap plot or people who only ever tear things down. A critic should trash a film because they wanted it to be better and saw wasted potential.
Yeah. Before you shut this off and go, I know the movie's bad, I'm not going to see it, click.
Right.
You will learn some information about the sinister underbelly of what Adam Sandler is doing, and how you're all being manipulated by this epic con man. Con man is in quotes.
Not because I need to feel superior.
Holy shit. Nakatomi has $640 million in bearer bonds after the Fiscal Responsibility Act was passed in 1982?
And want to show off how smart and cool they are. As you learn your tastes and preferences and those of a specific critics, you could eventually figure out if you would get something out of a movie based on what's written or said about it. Though always keep in mind that the only way you can really form your own opinion on a film is by taking the time to watch it yourself. As you look for stuff to watch through lists and reviews and what has won awards, value films that are new to you just as much as those that are considered good. Find something that'll engage you in a new way and teach you something. When looking at good, too, at least consider who's calling it good. The film Crash won Best Picture at the 78th Annual Academy Awards. Crash also spent $250,000 sending DVD screeners to the Academy membership. Rethink your comfort zones. There are some eras and genres and modes of filmmaking seen as boring or uninteresting by a lot of spectators. Some people have no interest in black and white film or subtitled film or documentaries or, heaven forbid, silent film. I'm assuming if you're watching this video you don't have that mindset, but if you do, I can guarantee you that if you expand your horizons a little, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Even past that, if I asked you what makes a good film, what would you say? Some people might say it needs an engaging plot and relatable characters. But what if your characters are horrible people? What if they're ignorant, cruel, or petty?
Whoops. Look, Jeremy, I've told you. It's out of my hands now. The Honda people are very hard to please.
Oh, Honda. F*** Honda.
Nice packet of crunchy nut you got here. Pretty expensive, as I recall.
I was laying in bed one night, and I was just thinking of an exchange between two people in which one tells another that he's dying of cancer, and the other one's reaction is to get out of the room as fast as possible.
I'm glad we can talk, you know? We can talk, right? Yeah, I mean, we should talk. We should talk. It started out like this. I wasn't feeling well. Did you want to talk right now?
Brakes pedal. No, I'm saying, no, the brakes. Guys, why aren't the brakes working?
Because I cut the brakes. Wild card, bitches. Yeah!
What if they're violent? And I don't mean in a cool action movie kind of violent, but violent in a realistic way that might hit too close to home and challenge your enjoyment of violent cinema. A film that makes you feel bad is just as valuable as a film that makes you feel good. They're just different. So what if the film's plot doesn't make much sense? What if it's hard to follow? What if, really, there is no plot? There are plenty of experimental films and art films that are engaging and fun that lack a lot of what people think about when they think about movies, because a more basic understanding of film is focused on a cause and effect narrative and feel-good resolution and stuff like that. If you abandon that focus, you'll see a fuller range of what the medium is capable of. Lin Lai, for instance, was an experimental filmmaker who created films like this one by scratching directly onto film stock. Noah McLaren painted onto clear film stock, including the area reserved for the film's soundtrack. The sounds you're hearing weren't recorded. They were created by hand.
Well, if a sound will make a pattern on film, a pattern on film will make a sound. You can even create your own sounds by drawing directly on the film. Norman McLaren, the motion picture artist, has been making some hand-drawn sounds, and now he's going to hear them for the first time, played on the Moviola, a sort of miniature movie projector.
There's no story here, no characters, no conflict, nothing like that. But you can see the joy of experimentation and a creative process that diverts from what you or I might have initially thought of when we think of moving pictures. On the opposite end, critics and film snobs can be just as dismissive of certain types of movies as people with no real interest in film.
4 Weddings had just come out. It was mental.
4 Weddings? It's a film, Alistair, very popular at the time, about weddings.
Oh, come on. You have seen 4 Weddings. You're trying to make out you're this oh so clever professor who hasn't got time to watch 4 Weddings or Ghostbusters or whatever like the rest of us. Well, I'm not buying it.
All I can say is I spend my free time reading rather than sitting around watching Ghostbusters.
And what exactly is the problem with Ghostbusters? Oh, look how many books I've got. I must be clever.
It is generally true that the bigger a film's budget, the more restrictive the creative constraints placed on it are, and that in trying to reach mass appeal, many films lose the ability to touch an individual spectator, but that does not mean that all big films are bad, or that the only valuable films are niche and experimental. As a spectator, you just need to be open to both ends of the spectrum. For example, horror films and other genre pictures are often looked down on as being trashy and offensive.
Part 5 has done very well at the box office, presumably because the teenagers who go to these movies know that there is absolutely no danger that they're going to be required to think or imagine or experience delight or joy or self-discovery. All they will have to do, all that's required of them, is to look at a lot of dead teenagers. And it occurs to me that teenagers going to a dead teenager movie are the equivalent of horses going to the glue factory.
How about you?
I do a little acting.
I think this is disingenuous. What horror is accused of, particularly sexism, exploitation of violence, violence against women, and general misogyny, is a problem with a lot of film and with the film industry itself. And to pretend offensive content is confined to so-called lowbrow genre pictures like horror or comedy, or is absent in art film or Oscar-bait drama film, is a way of ignoring the overall problem.
Admiration at your seeming selflessness.
Interest in your bold rejection of social norms as evidenced by your dyed hair.
Horror movies are just as valuable as any other type of film. Horror media in general is a great way to confront the things we don't like about ourselves and do it in a way other genres can't. Horror film can reveal the anxieties of a particular society.
Doctor, will you tell these fools I'm not crazy? Make them listen to me before it's too late! Listen to me. Please listen. If you don't, if you won't, if you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
It can confront specific aspects of society that are rarely examined or criticized, like parenthood. It can criticize racism. It can explore grief. This fearlessness and complexity can make critics uncomfortable, as was the case with Michael Powell's film Peeping Tom.
Peeping Tom hit a raw nerve with its 1960 audience, tapping into fears of popular cinema and loosening morals. Within weeks, the film was pulled, and Michael Powell's career and reputation suffered.
See, that's the problem with the film at the time probably, was that you have this serial killer, basically. He's horrible. Yet, he's presented as someone who touches you in a way. From the very beginning, something about his eyes and his quietness, especially when he photographs those models. It's a kind of uneasy empathy with this person.
Come on, love, don't be shy.
And I think it shocked people. Many critics really, as you know, reacted violently against it because they don't want those parts of themselves touched.
The commentary a horror film contains isn't limited to social commentary. It can be commentary on the genre itself. Sometimes, too, horror films can just be fun and visceral and don't have to have these profound statements to be valuable. All of these films are valuable. I talked before about being inspired by Truffaut making 400 Blows and being praised by people who had rejected his harsh criticism. Sam Raimi is another figure in cinema that I look up to. He made The Evil Dead very cheaply in a freezing cabin in the woods in Tennessee after raising money for it himself from investors like family, friends, doctors, lawyers, and dentists. He was a teenager when he did this.
There are two schools of thought, I think, for horror filmmakers. One is that the audience can always create something more horrible than you can show them. And the other school of thought is show them everything. And I believe that both is true. I believe the audience can come up with something more horrible in their minds than I can show them, provided they're given the raw materials to construct something. And I also believe that I've got some pretty horrible things to show myself, so I try and mix and match. I try and scare them and weird them out with visuals, and I try and leave room for them to add their own ingredients to create.
The worst crime I think that filmmakers can make is to make a boring picture. If it's boring, then it's all over. The audience, you've failed in entertaining them. You've committed a crime.
Sam and I first decided to do a horror film after doing research on what pictures did well in the markets. And at the time, which was the late 70s, there were still a lot of drive-ins, especially in the Midwest where we grew up. And there were forever horror films playing in the drive-ins on double bills, and that, which we always saw and said, God, we can make something better than this. There's absolutely no doubt about it.
Robert Tappert, Bruce Campbell, and myself all bought business suits and matching briefcases and dropped out of school. Then we worked as waiters, busboys, janitors, cab drivers.
So how old were you then?
18. And Bruce was 19 and Robert was 22 at the time.
We would sit down and pretend that we were businessmen. That was all part of the filmmaking process. We thought we had to do it because it never occurred to us to go to California because it was 3,000 miles away. And we thought we'd have as good a chance raising money independently, and it finally worked. But we really went to absolutely anybody who was financially capable of losing all their money.
If I'd written off Evil Dead as trashy or lowbrow, I wouldn't know about his story and wouldn't have his motivation and ingenuity to admire. For my last point, I want to say that you shouldn't be afraid to change your mind. You are a changing person. As you see more movies, your standards are going to change, because what you watch and learn will change your perspective. If I hadn't seen Crash a couple weeks after having seen Do the Right Thing for the first time, I might have liked it instead of hating it. And don't be afraid to revisit and reassess films you've loved. Sometimes this can give you an even deeper appreciation. Sometimes it makes you wonder what you were thinking. I actually saw the film Boondock Saints before I saw Pulp Fiction. I really liked Boondock Saints. I had a lot of fun with it. But when I had a better understanding of film, when I watched similar and much better films, when I had a more critical approach to the content of films and their meanings, I grew to really, really hate it. And it had nothing to do with what critics said about it or even that my film friends teased me for liking it. I liked it when I knew that other people hated it. It was my growing understanding of film and watching stuff that was superficially similar but so much better that gave my opinion a 180. This topic is way too big to be confined to one video, so next time I'll talk about specific categorizations critics and academics apply to films and how they can help you while hunting for movies. Also, be sure to check out the descriptions of these videos for additional links, notes, and stuff like that. Thanks. Hi, Shannon again. When I was a little kid, every Friday my parents would take us to Blockbuster Video. I'd get to help pick out a movie, and we would all watch it together. When I think of the way an average person might look at movies, I'm brought back to the way our Blockbuster was organized. Like around the outer wall you had all the new releases, but of greater variety and interest were the aisles. The selection was mainly organized by genre. Like, here's the horror, here's the action, here's the drama, here's the comedy. And kind of conflated with genre and shoehorned in were some other categories. If you were lucky, maybe you got a classics for older films and a foreign where all the non-US releases were lumped together. Netflix and other services still use a similar system, albeit with a lot more nuance and personalization. My Netflix mobile uses pretty much the exact same categories our Blockbuster did in the late 90s though. Genre is certainly a useful way to organize movies and a valuable tool. To only look at movies that way though, action, drama, comedy, horror, classic, foreign, is very, very reductive. So in addition to genre and two other categories that essentially amount to old and not American, I want to talk about some other means of classification you might not be as familiar with. First off, if you hear an academic talking about form or formal qualities in reference to film, they're referring to stuff like sound, editing, framing, lighting, and cinematography. The term mise-en-scène refers to the visual elements of a film's form as opposed to its sound elements.
It's a visual medium, man. Enough with this My Dinner with Andre. I mean, has this dude even heard of mise-en-scène? Put some information up in the frame, bitch.
Every Frame of Painting is explicitly a web series about film form. It explores everything from movement and shot composition to, in a great recent episode, how films use chairs. Generally, you can look at film form in opposition to film content, with form being the system a film uses to communicate its content, like a narrative, to you as a spectator. Two films with the same subject matter or similar narratives could have very different form. A film with inconsistencies between formal choices and the narrative, or formal choices and the intended effect on the audience, would be jarring.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Johnny, what's up?
Sometimes this is used intentionally, like for comedic effect. Airplane took a type of movie that took itself very seriously, the airplane disaster film, and exploited that seriousness. Airplane may share formal similarities with films like Airport, but its content is a world apart.
Sir, excuse me, sir. I'm sorry I have to wake you. You a doctor?
That's right.
You could take formal qualities from one era, silent film, and apply them to a film from a completely different era, like, say, a great 80s action film. Contrapuntal sound is a term for a juxtaposition between soundtrack and what happens on screen. Incongruity between form and content for an effect. A really easy and common example is the torture scene from Reservoir Dogs. And instead of showing that, I'm going to show you a part of one of my favorite YouTube videos.
How did you get out?
I shot my way out. Everybody started shooting, so I blasted my way out of there.
Wake me up before you go. Don't leave me hanging on like a yo-yo. Wake me up before you go. I don't wanna miss it when you hit that.
What makes genre kind of a weird way to classify films if it's your only real means of classification is that some genres are defined by formal qualities, like the musical, and some by narrative qualities. Many use both. Genre definitions are inherently kind of murky. They also ignore a lot of important aspects of films, like technology at the time, cultural climate, political subtext, country of origin, and the like. Classifications that some people might think of as genre, like film noir or documentary, could be seen instead as a cycle and a mode of filmmaking, respectively. Even if you're not super familiar with film noir, you're probably familiar with its aesthetic and tone from cultural osmosis and parody.
You say the lights went out? That light was joy. And it's getting snuffed out all over the city, dragging us all into a sea of blackness.
Can we go, you're gramified for really bringing us down?
No, keep talking.
I, personally, am in the cycle camp. Film noir, to me, is a specific title given by French critics to dark, morally ambiguous American films that were a cultural reaction to World War II's devastation and uncertainty. But film historians and academics still, in 2015, argue over exactly what film noir is. To be fair, my favorite film that's referred to as film noir, The Third Man, is British. So when you're defining a film, rather than using broad, easy, and sometimes inaccurate categories, you might want to instead look at its form, its content, and its context. When I talked about French New Wave formal techniques in the first episode, I was talking about stuff like jump cuts, an aesthetic born of using cheap film stock, usually reserved for still photography, and using available natural lighting, stuff like that. But the French New Wave was a film movement that was defined by way more than the formal techniques that it used. It was a rebellion, a burst of creativity, a bunch of people obsessed with movies getting fed up and realizing that they could do better. It was overtly political, and its films were not at all united by genre. And if you were just looking at American versus foreign for your films, French New Wave movies would be lumped in with innumerable films that they wouldn't really have anything in common with. Like, okay, broadly speaking, an American film is probably going to be different in some ways from a film from any other country. Some countries are more open to public funding of certain films because of their perceived cultural significance, so less small art films have to struggle to find investors. On the other hand, censorship in some countries is so strict that the content of films produced in those countries is much more limited than in films produced elsewhere. Each country developed its own filmmaking tradition over time, and each filmmaking tradition developed within that country's unique culture. But the foreign label is still reductive. Not only does it create a weird, unnecessary US-centric dichotomy between American films and literally every other film ever, but each individual director is going to have their own technique and personality that sets them apart. If you look at Akira Kurosawa's meticulous humanist drama versus Takashi Miike's dark humor and violence, or John Woo's action splendor versus Wong Kar-wai's vivid art films, or heartbreaking and resonant Italian neo-realist films versus flashy, gory giallo versus the spaghetti western, it's really easy to see that all of these films do not for 1 second belong on the same shelf. Similarly to how I know people who don't want to touch anything that has subtitles, I still talk to people who see all black and white movies or older movies as boring or essentially the same. But you have early silent film, like way before conventions of editing and other aspects of film form were really even established. Later silent film with its standouts and stars and genres. Then film in the 40s and 50s and all of the massive cultural shifts during that time period. And all of what Hollywood did in a panic to try to fight the rising power of TV, including weird, attention-seeking gimmicks. And on top of this, you have films that were more commercial versus more strange and experimental, films from different countries and different personalities within those countries, American films before and after Hays Code censorship, films during the Red Scare and blacklisting, and works by early black and female directors in the same decades Nazi and racist propaganda were being made. There is a huge and fascinating spectrum there. No film exists in a vacuum, and no film worth watching can be summed up by a simple 1 or 2 word label. If you only watch films from one category, and if you use categories that totally ignore some of the most important aspects of films, then you'll never really be able to appreciate the medium. Over the next couple episodes, I want to talk about specific film movements, specific directors, and auteur theory in general. If you have the means, please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. Thanks!
They do move in herds.
Hi, Shannon here. There aren't a lot of concepts in film theory or in film criticism that are shared with audiences at large. One of the few ideas that does sort of carry over for some spectators, though, is the idea of auteurism. Auteur theory is the idea that the director of a film should steer that film to represent their deliberate, unique creative vision, and that a good director makes films that are recognizably theirs. A film's director is then comparable to a novel's author, hence the name auteur. Despite film generally being a collaborative medium where thousands of people can be involved with a single project, auteur theory suggests that the end result is the director's vision, and that any director who makes films worth watching will have developed their own unique style. Even apathetic audiences probably know who Michael Bay, James Cameron, Christopher Nolan, Steven Spielberg, Alfred Hitchcock, Spike Lee, J.J. Abrams, and Quentin Tarantino are, and what to expect from their films. And even someone with just a passing interest in film could probably differentiate between Wes Anderson and P.T. Anderson without much effort as well. To give a better understanding of auteur theory and some counter-arguments and criticisms, I'm going to quickly summarize some influential pieces on it. In 1948, Alexandre Astruc published an essay on the camera stylo, or the camera as pen. In this essay, he describes film as a means of writing just as flexible and subtle as written language that can tackle any subject, any genre. Where his essay best lends itself to auteur theory is when he states that there's plenty of room for a different and individual kind of filmmaking, admitting that this idea implies that the scriptwriter directs his own scripts, or rather, that the scriptwriter ceases to exist. For in this kind of filmmaking, the distinction between author and director loses all meaning. The filmmaker/author writes with his camera as a writer writes with his pen. In 1954, François Truffaut published his scathing A Certain Tendency of the French Cinema, which I touched on a little bit in episode 1. Truffaut attacks films considered a part of French cinema's tradition of quality, bloated, expensive films based on French novels, where screenwriters were more celebrated than directors. When speaking on what he calls the audacities in cinema, breaks in tradition or convention that he praises, he prefers cinematic rather than novelistic audacities, such as the way Jacques Tati's Monsieur Hulot walks, saying, "You will have realized that these audacities are the work of men of the cinema, not scriptwriters, of directors, not men of letters." He said, "I simply cannot bring myself to believe in a peaceful coexistence between the tradition of quality and a cinema d'auteur." And his piece was seen as a call to arms for la politique des auteurs.
Bien sûr, les films se font en équipe, mais que où quelqu'un a quelque chose à dire, où quelqu'un a des idées sur la vie et sur le cinéma et sur le monde. Et alors tout ce qu'il fait est intéressant, même si un tel film est un peu moins bien que celui d'avant. Ou bien c'est quelqu'un qui fait son travail de façon anonyme et ce n'est pas intéressant. C'était ça la politique des auteurs. C'était né d'une phrase de Giraudoux qui disait « Il n'y a pas de pièces de théâtre, il n'y a que des auteurs ». Giraudoux voulait dire « Il y a le bloc Claudel, le bloc Giraudoux, le bloc Molière, le reste, les pièces. Une pièce réussie par hasard n'a pas d'intérêt ». C'était ça l'idée. Et d'autre part, cette politique des auteurs avait un sens dans la critique française. Elle était, pour le cinéma français, elle disait au fond que n'importe quel film de Cocteau ou de Robert Bresson était plus intéressant, même si éventuellement le film n'était pas réussi, que n'importe quel film de Jean Delannoy ou de metteurs en scène qui travaillaient en adaptant des chefs-d'œuvre, mais de façon anonyme, disons.
For years, most of the criticism in Cahiers du Cinema was rooted in auteur theory, praising consistent directors like Hitchcock and Lang, and it was under the auteur framework that Cahiers filmmakers like Truffaut and Godard went on to succeed. Although, over time, Cahiers became much more political and abandoned the auteur focus. In 1962, Andrew Sarris wrote Notes on the Auteur Theory, crystallizing its definition and bringing it to the forefront of British and American film criticism. According to Sarris, an expert production crew could probably cover up for a chimpanzee in a director's chair. How do you tell the genuine director from the quasi-chimpanzee? After a given number of films, a pattern is established. So, he proposes that the 3 premises of auteur theory are 1. The technical competence of a director, 2. The distinguishable personality of the director, And 3, interior meaning, a more abstract concept dealing with tension between the director's personality and their work. The, quote, ultimate glory of cinema as an art. Saris then suggests an image of 3 concentric circles. A director who has mastered technique is a technician, a director who has mastered technique and style is a stylist, and a director who has mastered technique, style, and interior meaning is an auteur. Then, in 1963, and in direct opposition to what Saris had written, Pauline Kael published Circles and Squares. Kael's essay was vicious. She said stuff like, repetition without development is decline, criticism is an art, not a science, and a critic who uses a single theory is like a gardener who uses a lawnmower on everything that grows. While she conceded that auteur theory helped liberate the energies of French critics, she claims that it takes on an anti-art and anti-intellectual role with Americans and the English, outright calling them connoisseurs of trash. She claims that adhering to established technical methods could be a hindrance, leading to banal slickness rather than discovery of their own methods, and that the smell of a skunk is more distinguishable than the perfume of a rose. Does that make it better? She even suggests that Hitchcock is a more recognizable auteur than someone like Carol Reed because Hitchcock repeats while Reed tackles new subject matter. She says, it is an insult to an artist to praise his bad work along with his good. It indicates that you are incapable of judging either. She also suggests that praising tension between an artist and the material, like a good director making a passable movie from a bad script, is idiotic when compared to what can be achieved with unity of form and content, referring to interior meaning as a mystique and a mistake. It is a good thing he stopped at 3, she says. A few more circles, and we'd really be in hell.
The auteur theory does not tell you how to evaluate a movie. It only points up the fact that the director is the key element in movie making. I think it has been used by certain people on the basis that if, say, Raoul Walsh made it, it's a good movie. And that is what I really argue with.
That ironclad rule that insists
on that. That's right. And also that directors get better as they get older. I think they don't.
Even Andre Bazin, one of the founders of Cahiers du Cinéma, was critical of auteur theory. In 1957, he published On the Politique des Auteurs. Speaking of critics in his magazine, such as Truffaut and Romer, he says he often agrees with them and sees some value in auteur theory, but disagrees with the idea of critics beginning by reading the signature at the bottom of a painting. To him, there is the danger here of an aesthetic personality cult. In his essay, he attempts to show that mediocre auteurs can, by accident, make admirable films, and conversely, a genius can fall victim to an equally accidental sterility. Not to in any way put myself on the same level as Estrue, Truffaut, Saris, Kael, or Bazin, but my personal interpretation of auteur theory as a film fan is that I believe looking at certain directors as auteurs has value, both in tracing their evolution and in praising distinct voices.
And in fact, when we started this interview, somebody took a shot at you and they hit you, right?
Yes, it hit me. I heard it and it hurts a little bit.
And I was just standing next to you and
it's not a significant bullet.
Well, have you got a wound? Look, you're bleeding.
I think here somewhere. Yeah.
Look, somebody shot at you and created a wound in your abdomen.
It's not significant. The enormity of their flat brain, the enormity of their stupidity is just overwhelming.
I like to make films because I like to go into another world. I like to get lost in another world. And film to me is a magical medium that makes you dream, allows you to dream in the dark, and it's just a fantastic thing to get lost inside the world of film.
I definitely wouldn't hesitate to use the term auteur when speaking of a variety of directors that I admire, but hailing idiosyncrasy as superiority is a mistake, especially, as Bazin points out, when you unfairly dismiss potentially great films. I would rather watch someone who evolves and experiments than someone who is rigidly consistent, and many of my favorite films did not come from auteurs.
Sometimes a person who's simply a very good craftsman is better than somebody who thinks he's, the next D.W. Griffith. Because what we need is some, well-made pictures. Most pictures aren't even very well made.
It doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain Casablanca. It doesn't explain A Great Escape. John Sturges was a great Hollywood director, but he's not an auteur. He doesn't fit into the auteur theory.
The idea of valuing or devaluing a film based on the body of work that surrounds it seems absurd to me. Plus, this theory ignores the work and creativity of so many other people. The vast majority of films are collaborative art, and a lot of what is praised in many great films is owed in part to editors, cinematographers, screenwriters, and many other individuals who work with directors.
Movies are a group of dedicated people setting out to do something the best way they can.
It's perfectly obvious that the director is the key person who has to coordinate the elements of a movie. But it's also true that he needs great collaborators. Without a good script to stand on, he can't get very far without good technicians and exactly the right actors. He can't do what he wants.
It's ridiculous. The whole notion of the auteur school of filmmaking is an insult to everybody else in every other aspect of filmmaking.
I also enjoy reading pieces on the much more recent movement called vulgar auteurism, that seeks to analyze and celebrate directors usually ignored or outright treated with contempt by most critics. You don't have to enjoy a movie or consider it or its director good to be interested in it or an analysis of it. I'm sure that what I enjoy in directors I admire might not have aligned with what Saris and the Cahiers critics would have praised as the work of gifted auteurs, but I'll admire those directors all the same. I'm also uncomfortable with how Eurocentric and Americacentric the readings I drew from are, and the fact that most, though not all, of the most highly regarded and visible pieces on auteurism, and the most highly regarded and visible auteurs from those pieces, amount to mostly white dudes talking about mostly white dudes. There are fundamental issues with critics being gatekeepers of who is and who is not an auteur to begin with, that are then exacerbated by possible prejudices, conscious or unconscious. Varda and Mizoguchi are a couple of rare exceptions to this, with early Cahiers critics who, for example, criticized Kurosawa for not being Japanese enough, whatever that means. Kale rightly points out the weirdly sexist criticism from Saris in his piece, and also criticizes how critics who use this theory tended to praise masculine stories more than others. For the record, there have almost always been international cinemas outside of the US and Europe and non-white cinema within those places, and there were always women working in cinema, including as directors, though many women worked as screenwriters and editors, positions less valued by auteur critics. Like anything else, auteur theory is a useful tool for organization and analysis, but it falls short if it's the only tool you're using.
In fact, I think we overstressed it, because now everybody thinks every director, whoever did a picture was an auteur, you know.
That was never the intent.
They had two dogs in a picture, they said, geez, no, it's a movie about dogs.
Just keep the lawnmower out of the garden, and you'll be good.
You experience joy when you recognize a pathetic little link between two Raoul Walsh pictures, but you never explain whether you think the discovery makes the pictures any better.
Well, Pauline, maybe the theory is too deep for you to understand.
Maybe it is too stupid for me to entertain. Goodbye, folks. I have had enough of this crap. Just say goodbye, Andy, and let the folks go home.
Hi, Shannon here for episode 5. It's easy to get frustrated with the film industry sometimes, especially if you care about art and innovation.
I mean, Angry Birds is shitting all over us, guys. We're getting killed.
People financing films typically only give big budgets and big marketing budgets to films they feel are safe.
People only care about seeing what they know.
Safety also extending to financiers not wanting to finance films that showcase narratives outside of the mainstream.
Isn't it enough just to make a good film?
No!
Even the MPAA discriminates, and not only on certain content.
Well, in a construct where most movies are written by men, directed by men, they're mostly the male experience. So there's something about that that's scaring them, that's unnerving them.
The current rating system is a form of censorship in a kind of fundamental way because it categorizes films in advance of their release, and they're categorized not by the people who make them, but by a handful of people whose names we'll never know.
But based on the pull of film and its backers have as well.
We serve the public, we serve the parents, it's a crap. They serve the studios. That's who pays their bills, that's who they are. I mean, they are the studios.
There's a problem here, yes. Can somebody explain that? No. Is there anybody I can call? No.
And their whole position was, when we did this film, was we don't give specific notes, because then we'd be a censorship organization. We just give you the rating. And cut to 5 years later, we're doing the South Park movie, and now we're working for Paramount, it's a big studio. And we turned in the first cut of the movie, and we get a phone call, and you got an NC-17. Well, you need to cut out this, change this to this, and it was extremely specific. This word, this line, this joke. So our treatment was a completely different experience.
And to studios, a film that does well commercially is a success and an indicator of what future films should be made.
So what are we supposed to do about Angry Birds?
Then for every ticket that's sold for a sequel, a remake, or a reboot, that's one less person that could have been seeing something new and interesting.
Every weekend, another big movie. Big movies. We're trying to find a place.
You're comparing us to movies. I mean, this is not a Marvel movie.
We're crawling through broken glass here.
If there's some work out there that I really enjoy and am inspired by, why would I remake it? Here's what's wrong with that thing that I love. Let me go, yeah, exactly. No, I mean, well, fundamentally, I just don't think that's, it's basically saying that we can't figure out any new stories, or we can't figure out any new ways to tell them, and I mean, that seems like giving up. I don't know what that is, really.
Something that could have propelled the medium forward or engaged spectators with a fresh idea that never got financed.
We need help.
Or maybe never even got written in the first place because of the constraints this kind of industry can put on a screenwriter's imagination. In this video, I want to explain that, however repulsive and discouraging this is, it's nothing new, and that it's something we shouldn't necessarily be afraid of. The reason it's taken me so long to make this video is that I didn't really know how to handle covering film movements. I know my expertise is not nearly deep enough to cover the majority of film movements in any way that's satisfactory, especially considering that there are other resources out there where people can self-educate. What I came to in deliberating, though, was that I wanted to emphasize 1, films are not made in a vacuum, and 2, the industry isn't static. Here's a quote I came across. If you go to France nowadays, you are constantly involved in passionate discussions about the creative side of movie making. Here in Hollywood, we are going in circles. We have moved into a trap, a self-imposed, self-induced trap with our dependence on bestsellers, hit plays, remakes, and rehashes. Pretty standard complaints, right? Maybe you've expressed similar ideas, or you've heard other people express them. The quote was actually about films in the early 1960s. The quote is from director Fred Zinnemann, and it's pulled from a book called Pictures at a Revolution. The book is about a film movement called the New Hollywood, also known as the American New Wave. What a lot, though not all, of film movements have in common is a bloated, stagnant industry being upturned by a group of young, impassioned filmmakers. The Japanese New Wave, which actually started out working from within the established studio system, was revolutionary both in terms of experimenting with film form and in critiquing social conventions. The Hong Kong New Wave implemented more advanced technical methods, more modern rather than traditional themes, and was more strongly influenced by Western film and culture. Italian neorealism was a response to the social conservatism and artificiality of white telephone films, and its films utilize actual locations rather than sets and use non-actors to portray realistic, everyday struggles. The French New Wave, which I've talked about before, was similarly in opposition to the bloated tradition of quality.
They shook up the medium. They shook it up in France, and by shaking it up in France, they shook it up in the whole world, not just in America.
There are many other new waves in cinema, each with their own unique story, and many movements that weren't new waves that are still very important, but you get the picture. Over and over, all over the world, young filmmakers have challenged convention, whether it be technical, cultural, political, or a combination, and in the process, they have shaped film going forward. Arthur Penn, director of Bonnie and Clyde, a film that was a part of the New Hollywood, said of the time period that it wasn't just that we were sick of the system was sick of itself. New Hollywood films were a renaissance of American cinema, where young directors revitalized the industry. It's hard to read much about film without bumping into the French New Wave.
I do the really pretentious thing where I watched way too much French New Wave.
Even if you only know about it as a nebulous idea rather than a concrete one. And if you're aware of what a lot of people consider to be important films, you've probably heard of Bicycle Thieves, even if you don't know what Italian neorealism is. The thing is, the French New Wave was influenced by Italian neorealism. David Newman and Robert Benton, the writers of Bonnie and Clyde, were tremendous fans of the French New Wave and Francois Truffaut.
All the time we were writing it, we were thinking of Truffaut because we just idolized his films, and he was very influential. And both Jules and Jim and later on Shoot the Pianist had a lot to do with our mental set.
We really tried our best to write a kind of American Julie Jim.
Exactly.
Yeah. We were caught by that spirit.
And even recruited him for help with the film. Along with displaying a clear French New Wave influence, it served as a counterculture reimagining of 1930s gangster films, and its more violent scenes drew a lot of controversy. When they screened a rough cut of their movie for Jack Warner of Warner Brothers, the studio financing the film,
You son of a bitch.
He hated it. Warren Beatty tried to placate him, saying it was an homage to older Warner Brothers gangster movies. Warner replied,
What the is an homage?
So there's an example of just one film from one country penned by two passionate film nerds who took in a variety of influence spanning decades, and while they were praised critically and resonated with younger audiences, they were still up against not only wider cultural rejection of the film's violence, but also disinterest and contempt from the person in charge. But now, in 2016, does someone with passion even need permission from a Jack Warner to make their weirdo sexualized gangster homage film? And does cultural backlash or misunderstanding matter as long as the right people support and see the film? There are cell phones that record HD video that you can then easily edit within an app on those same phones. There are phones that can shoot in 4K. I've got little lens attachments for my phone camera, and there are apps that give you control over focus and aperture. All the goofy little cutaways you see in my videos are filmed on my phone. It's pretty easy to pay a few dollars for a selfie stick and use it as a monopod. Although, I mean, like, a monopod is a selfie stick. It's just, they just call it a selfie stick because they're popular now. It's just a monopod. The death of 35mm film is unfortunate for sure, but it means greater accessibility in filmmaking, which means more varied and diverse stories can be told. The film Tangerine was shot on iPhones. A real feature film was shot on iPhones. And it was a film that covered subject matter that might not have been backed with a bigger budget.
I recently moved out to Los Angeles. I've been there for about 3 years now, and I just have found that city to be fascinating in the way that I thought the city was shot out by the studios, meaning that I thought that it's already been covered by mainstream Hollywood fare. And then I found so many pockets and little areas, communities that haven't had stories told about them. And my hope is that there are many more films made about this subject and the subject of the entire, trans movement, and also and made by members of the trans community.
And speaking of Jack Warners, there's this movie called Side by Side about the decline in 35mm film and the rise of digital. In 2012, I saw a screening of it with a panel discussion and a Q&A. Here's something I wrote on it on the same day, almost 4 years ago, only altered slightly. Great panel discussion tonight following the screening of Side by Side, apart from the middle-aged woman who lamented the fact that anyone can make a movie now, and that we no longer have tastemakers who decide for us what is good and what should be seen. You know, what a loss. How will I know what is good without old white men telling me? And that weird person my age who compared using CGI effects in a film to an athlete taking steroids. Remind me of that person in class today who was just too cool and detached and snooty to take The Killer seriously or enjoy it. I actually spoke up after The Weird Girl, and I complained that cinema is an art form, not a contest, and that all that matters is the final product. For real. It was incomprehensible to me then, and it's incomprehensible to me now, that someone would lament the fall of tastemakers and gatekeepers. I mean, Godard was praised for using cheap alternatives to traditional methods to get his first films made in the 50s and 60s. Now, so many people are armed with the tools to make a feature and put it out there. Even if you don't want to make films yourself, with crowdfunding, you as a spectator now have the option of easily and conveniently supporting media you care about. Going forward, here's what you can do. Take risks with your ticket money. Support unconventional movies. Support independent creators. Get involved in your local film scene if there is one. If there isn't, try to start one. Shoot a movie on an iPhone. I'm not saying that if you start a Kickstarter that money will pour in, or that if you make a short film or a feature and put it on Vimeo that people will actually watch it. The amount of media available is kind of overwhelming, and it's easy for good stuff to get buried. And it's still difficult and expensive to make a feature.
Yes, it's super inspiring for all of us because it sort of democratizes creativity, but yet at the same time, like, go learn. Like, go learn what makes an incredible movie, and there's 100 years worth of it, you know?
But just the fact that more people than ever have access to basic tools to make and distribute films, or make and distribute YouTube videos analyzing films, is wonderful to me. I am so excited to see what films people who grew up with smartphones and playing around in Final Cut come up with. I don't know what people are going to refer to current trends and technological shifts as in 10 or 20 years. People have been talking about a digital revolution for many years, but technology in the 80s and 90s isn't really comparable to what we have now. I know that even just since I got into film and filmmaking in the mid-2000s, it's become so much easier and so much more accessible to make and appreciate films.
Just in the year and a half, the advancement in technology is incredible. I hear that now you can even capture 3K on your iPhones with certain apps, which blows my mind. I'm actually jealous of people shooting films today on a year and a half later on the iPhone.
Technology progresses at an exponential rate, not a linear one, and people with passion and drive are great at taking advantage of technological advancement to further their own expression and creativity. I feel like we're in the midst of some kind of new wave now, and I'm very excited to see where it'll lead. And, you know, people are always lamenting the inevitable death of cinema as we know it, but that's nothing new either. TV was seen as a legitimate threat to film in the 50s, and you can see how that turned out. And even worst case scenario, like, tentpole films are unsustainable, theaters fold, studios crumble, cinema as we know it is no more. People will always need to express themselves. People will always want to consume art and want to support it. Artistic expression and consumption of art are both bedrocks of the human experience, and shifts in technology are never going to change that, even if they end up favoring some mediums over others.
It's not only my dreams. My belief is that all these dreams are yours as well. And the only distinction between me and you is that I can articulate them. And that is what poetry or painting or literature or filmmaking is all about. It's as simple as that. And I make films because I have not learned anything else. And I know I can do it to a certain degree. And it is my duty, because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are. And we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
I feel like technology shifting in a way that makes media more accessible, both as consumer and producer, is by definition a shift in a positive direction. And really, if an industry is fearful and stagnant and cherry picks what narratives to include and makes so many stupid exclusionary decisions, only thinly rationalized by greed, then I'm not going to be super upset if people who can do something better and more engaging come along and replace it.
And trust me, I'm the biggest critic against I can't stand digital cinema, to be quite honest with you. I'm in that camp of Tarantino and Nolan where it's like...
But this isn't your first digital feature, right?
No, and I can't wait to get back to film. I can't... but sorry, everybody. But but you know what? You make the most of what you have. It's really... And if you're a filmmaker, you can't just stop because you don't have a budget. You got to move forward with in any way you can.
Hey, thanks for watching episode 5 of So You Want to Be a Film Nerd. If you have some extra money, please donate to my Patreon. You can check out the first 4 episodes on my YouTube channel here, and you can also check out a video essay I did about Hot Fuzz and a video essay I did about video games as a medium. And in the description, there are links to me on social media and everything. And thank you so much for watching.
Can we cut that?
Sure.
The part where I said gouge your f***ing eyes out?
Yeah, that was a weird thing to say.
Well, I mean, it's like 4 films a year.
Oh my God.
Why are people gonna get sick of all these spin-offs and standalone films, cinematic universes?
All the f***ing cameras